I'd like to give a talk called Inside Out. And it's mostly to have the chance to finish telling or to tell you more of that story that I started the other day, which happens to be my favorite story these days. First of all, I want to give you the context of the story within the story. So the story that I was telling you is a story that's told by a queen. So if you've read or heard of the Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights, it's one of the stories from there. And the queen is queen for a day. And then she's queen for a day again, and queen for a day again, as long as her story is interesting enough for the king to keep listening. Because the king got so hurt. One time he was going to visit his brother in the next kingdom, and he forgot something. And he went back to get it, and he saw his wife inviting a soldier from the army into her bath. And so that was the end of that marriage. And the king was so hurt that he made a new rule. He said, "Oh, women, none of them are trustworthy. So I will just marry one woman a day, and then that will be the end of that. And I'll marry another woman the next day, and that will be the end of that." But since he was that kind of king, the end of that meant the end of the woman as well. And so the people of the kingdom were not very happy. It would be one thing to be queen for a day and then go back home. But to be queen for the day, or to send your sister or your mother or probably not your mother, your sister or your daughter to be queen for the day and then never to see her again, was not something that anyone was happy about. The king was also not happy, but he wouldn't listen to anyone. He was too hurt. So finally, the chief advisor of the king found that his daughter approached him. The chief advisor of the king had an amazing couple of daughters, and one of them came up to him and said, "I want to marry the king tomorrow." And of course the chief advisor said, "No way, I'm not going to send you to your death. You've got to be crazy." But she was sure that there had to be an end to this killing. And she had an idea of how she could end it, because she was a very good storyteller. So finally she convinced her father. She might have said, "Well, if it's not today, it'll be next week, because there's not that many girls around, not that many young women left in the kingdom. So let me go." So she went to save her kingdom, or at least the women of her kingdom, which meant everyone in the kingdom. And she asked the king, "Okay, now that we're married, could I please have my sister with me, my younger sister with me tonight, since it's our last night and we love each other so dearly?" And so the king agreed. "Okay, it's your final wish. How can I refuse?" She didn't ask for a pizza. She asked to have her sister with her. And towards dawn, towards the time that she would be killed, she started to tell her sister a story so that the king could hear. And she got to the exciting part, and then she said, "Oh, that's all we have time for today." And the king said, "Oh, okay, it's true, it's morning. Why don't you just stay around another day and tell the rest of the story tonight?" And it went on and on like that. And this is, to me, that's the frame story. And then she tells all of these stories. And I don't want to analyze the story, but there are so many ways that the story can touch us. I want to just say a few possible levels of what the story communicates about us. And whatever I say would just be a beginning. So don't let it take away from the ways the story could touch you and teach you. But it basically seems to me that we are like the king, so hurt that we can't stand to have anything longer than a day. And out of our hurt, trying to defend ourselves, we keep killing. And the only hope is something that can face death, like this daughter of the chief advisor. I may die, but I would die next week, so let me go when I want to go and meet the king. Something that can be courageous enough to meet us, that kind of rises up unexpectedly. But it doesn't just rise up and say, enough of killing. It rises up with a story that interests us so much that we're willing to stay for another day. We're willing not to escape, not to run away, not to let the hurt take over. So there's a gentleness that rises up, but it's a gentleness that also sees us utterly clearly, and therefore with love. Even this killing part of us. And so she can tell stories that will speak to us without our realizing, without our feeling confronted. So our practice, when we find it and we let it rise up to marry us, and we have our sword ready, but then we keep loving it. Okay, one more day. And so that quality of there is not a future, or we don't know if there will be a future. There's tonight. If we could let ourselves be all the characters in the story, but if we could more often take the part of that courage that rises up and loves, and tells the story of the night with enough energy that it becomes unstoppable. So that we're not intimidated by our own pain, by our own defensiveness, so our own judgment and criticism. And even if we feel intimidated, something that rises up anyway. And doesn't speak directly to us. It speaks to her beloved sister. And we're listening. We're overhearing. So I'm not saying this is the I don't even want to say it's an interpretation of the story, but just a lovely way of feeling life and practice inspired by the story. And she tells a lot of stories about courageous women to slowly start to change the king's ideas about women. And towards the end, she tells the story that I started to tell the other day, where there's a king. I didn't mention that he was young. He had just taken the throne. His father had just died, and he'd just taken the throne. And he went out as usual, disguised, into his kingdom, and he heard the three voices. And he could hardly wait to fulfill the three wishes. And he was so in love that he almost didn't know he was in love. He was so in love with this third sister, with a voice like, I would say the cuckoo, because that's my favorite bird song here. Your favorite bird. Or your favorite sound, because it's a voice that melted him. She couldn't help it. She didn't mean to. She wasn't speaking to him, but it melted him. And because he didn't realize how melted he was, I think, he made the big mistake of not taking envy, not taking jealousy into account. So he fulfilled the wishes of all three. He gave them exactly what they'd asked for. Marry the baker, marry the chef, and marry the king. So that part of us that likes to think of ourselves as doing good, as being good, without being aware of the consequences of fulfilling wishes. If someone's wish is a small wish, or if some part of us has a small wish and we fulfill it. So the danger of the wrong kind of innocence, when we experience what is called bright faith, when we're at the beginning, a kind of love affair with some part of our practice. We don't actually allow our deep eyes to see what's going on, the whole picture. And we don't take into account our own experience of what happens when we feel insulted, when we feel we've been seen as less, criticized or put down. There are many parts of us that could, it's a strange way to say, but there are many parts of us, as there are many people, who can easily feel put down, left out, rejected, not belonging. And if that's touched, if that's triggered, it kind of releases venom into our system. Venom is poison. So in the story, the two older sisters who are now married to the baker and the chef, the soonest they can, which is when they meet in the baths a few weeks after their marriage, they make a plan of how to get their revenge, how to enact their jealousy, how to take it to the utmost. this reminds me of when we are trapped in a feeling of being slighted, of being put down, being rejected. And it feels so important to stay there rather than to even feel loved or even feel heard or even hear any of the voices that say you belong. And you can wish for the most. When we feel we don't belong, then we wish for a little. And it feels like the most we could ask for. But there is a place in us that can't be stopped. That says, why baker and chef? If I'm married to the king, I can have whatever I want to eat anytime. I can have whoever I want come around. The king also stays close to his wife, but he likes to go hunting. And again, stupid king. When his wife is about to give birth to their first child, he goes hunting, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go hunting. So he goes hunting. And the two sisters come to help their younger sister in her time of need. And she gives birth to a beautiful son. And she's very tired, and she says, oh, at least my sisters are here to help me. I can sleep, I can rest. They can take care of the baby. And they take care of the baby in their own way, which is to put it in a basket and float it down the river, and to replace it with a puppy. And they say, when the king comes home, and they say to the whole of the palace, oh my goodness, the queen has given birth to a dog. And the king is so angry that he almost throws the queen out. But everyone convinced, not everyone, everyone but the sisters, love the queen so much that they convince him, maybe it's just a one-off, try again. And so they try again. And again, he goes hunting, because you're supposed to go hunting. And again, she needs help because she's giving birth and she has the older child to take care of and all of that. And the sisters again come to help. They are her blood relations, so they're the first ones to be called. And they take care of the second son in the same way as the first, replacing it with a kitten. And again, the palace is in an uproar, and when the king comes back from hunting, he almost kills his wife because he's so ashamed that he's married some kind of witch that he can't quite think straight. And then again, the love of the queen, of all the other people, convince him to try again. And again, the same thing happens. This time it's a girl. She floats down the river, and she's replaced by a log. Not even a live puppy or kitten that you could cuddle, but a dead piece of wood. The king is so angry. Again, he wants to kill her. And the people convince him, don't kill her. He says, okay, worse than death, build her a box, put the box outside the mosque, and everyone who enters the mosque should spit in her face. Which some people did. Spit in her face. But of course, there's pain, there's defensiveness, there's anger, there's shame, but there's also something else that goes on in and around the place, and carried the baskets one by one to the doorstep of the head gardener. And the head gardener and his wife had no children, of course, and so they were delighted to receive these beautiful children. They were loving people. They raised the children knowing how to love. They gave them also all the science and art and history that you could want and more. And it was time for the gardener to retire, and the king rewarded his beloved gardener for his good services over all these years with a big piece of land and enough resources to build whatever kind of garden was his dream. So he did. And then he and his wife died. So the 3 children now are young adults. They can take care of each other. They actually get closer than ever in losing their parents, who were of a certain age anyway. And now we pause the story again for a while. I hope to tell more today, but I want to tell another part of the story, of our story. Just the different ways the kind of fragrance of the story can come across to you. Even in a moment like this kind of middle of the retreat, and especially for those who do the whole month, the middle of the month, I feel, the last couple of days and today, a kind of building pressure in a good way, like why we come on retreat. Kind of pressure that can build, that usually we escape from if we're deciding what to do all day. If we're deciding for ourselves, that we usually escape more often than we do here. I'm not saying we don't escape here, but less often. And one way that the pressure shows is the places that we've been hurt come up, maybe in dreams, maybe in waking, maybe both. And we could take it as like the crisis that happens in the peak of a story. Or we could take it in the way that, like Rumi talks about, the broken places being where the light comes through. So a place to leave in the right hands. Not to leave it with the jealous sisters. It's a kind of place where something could be born. An opening where something new could be born. Out of the pain of the past, from the same place. But not calling the past in to help. Not calling the kind of petty mind, the jealous, the competitive, the comparing mind. Not calling that in to take care of this hurt. And so it mostly means being with what's calling your attention. It's not always the pain. Sometimes it's the pleasure. For some people, there could be sexual energy very strongly coming up, and just letting it be there. Intense. So intensity in whatever form. Feeling, if you would be the king, in that time it was the king usually who would kind of decide, and who would be in charge of like looking over the whole kingdom and feeling who or what is the appropriate caretaker of this birth. Who could stand by and be ready to help? Who would somehow intuitively know what to do and what not to do? And what mostly to let it happen by itself if all goes well. Does that make sense? Okay. There can be an agony that's not a problem, but that needs help, that needs more feeling of quiet support and quiet standing by with no freaking out, with a trust that what needs to be known will be known in the time, in the moment. Now I want to bring in something from like much farther than, in English we say left field, like that would be like way out of bounds. Something very weird, but very close to home for all of us, something that we all share. I had the chance to study embryology, so the process that happens when the body's being formed, when it's just a few cells big. So it's, first of all, really good to remember that every single one of our bodies went through this process. It's just so weird. And so good to know that the body did it. And there's this whole part that happens amazingly before we even actually connect in to the womb of our mother. So it can give us a kind of sense of buoyancy of what's possible just on our own, without knowing and without being anyone yet. And so there's just a few cells. So there's just enough cells to have a front and a back. And that's all. And then you could even play with starting to feel the front of your body, because there's a way that I experienced with this teacher, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. I know that one of you at least studied this, her system. Not system, but her discoveries. Her ongoing discovery, called body-mind centering. And she talks about it as something that we have a memory of, that we could feel our physical experience as being a few cells big. That we could actually feel it in our big body now. We can feel the front body and the back body before there was anything else. If you want, don't be shy. Like it could help to actually just brush the front of the body and the back of the body. And for some people, it will be possible to feel, and for other people, it will not be possible to feel, and that's not a problem. So please forgive me for bringing this in, knowing that for some people, it's not possible to feel. That's not the way your mind works or your system works. But if you feel something, it's also, don't be surprised or think it's weird or something wrong with you. So there's front body and there's back body, and there's a space between the two where there's not yet any cells. And if you tune into that space between the front layer of cells and the back layer of cells, some people in the course that I did talked about it as being electric, and some people talked about it as feeling friendly and soft, and I would say all of that is true in my experience. And into that middle space then comes the middle body. The middle body starts to grow up. And one cool thing about the middle body, which seems to be the most inside body at this point, is that this middle body, which is also becomes the middle skin, so the inner skin, the outer skin, and the middle skin, this middle body starts to also come around the sides. And so what's inmost is also outermost. And if you want, just for fun, we could go then a few moments later in our life, a few days later in our life, in all of our lives, where the front body starts to be what's called the yolk sac. So in a chicken egg, it's the yellow yolk. For us, it's what becomes the digestive system. So it's about nourishment. That's in the front, and it gets pulled inside. And then something kind of bounces out and becomes the placenta. But if you want to just play with back up where there's the front body, the back body, and the middle body, and then the front body starting to grow, and so there's a feeling of nourishment in the front, like a yolk sac, almost like a yoga ball, but more bouncy, that you could actually kind of lean on. And for those that sense of this nourishing, the tissue that's about nourishment, if that comes to your experience, it can be something worth tuning into when you know you need nourishment. You can reconnect to that. And then the back body, it's very, very cool, becomes the amniotic cavity. So it becomes what's another word for cavity? Like a space with the amniotic fluid. That's the fluid that we were all floating in. It starts out being in our back as a space full of fluid that you could try, again, maybe more like if a trampoline could be fluffy. Trampoline is that toy, that thing that you can jump on, springy fabric that children jump on and usually get hurt when they fall off, that thing. So it's very springy, but not flat. Something that we could lean back on and have support, but it's such an elastic support. So that then grows around and becomes the whole amniotic space that the whole baby then, that we floated in. So just for fun, if you feel it, you can tune into that from time to time. And if you don't feel it, put it somewhere in storage for when it might be useful, or wipe it away if that's not your way of experiencing. So then this middle body comes up and comes all the way around the whole amniotic space. So this middle body, middle tissue, becomes a skin that goes around the whole amniotic fluid. And so what we have this inmost that's outermost as well. I just really I totally get turned on by this story of our body and how it happened, how it happens without our doing, and the beauty of it, the beauty of that story. So thank you for letting me give you what might for some people be a kind of metaphor and also experience, where you could feel centered and also there's the nourishment, there's the kind of floating and expansiveness of the amniotic, of the back body. But there's also a kind of containment as well that's not separate from the inmost. Isn't that beautiful? So that's our story. And this kept coming, and then I thought, okay, not to say that, well, or to yes, say that I'm going to go this really, really far-fetched connection between the front, back, so the first, the second, and the third body, the inmost and the outmost, and the first, the second, and the third sister, but especially the third sister. The third sister who was put into the box, for being too good, too innocent, being fooled by and punished by the sisters for wishing for everything and receiving it. To just feel a kind of resonance between that third sister who becomes the queen and then is the pariah, is the rejected one, the spat upon, as our inmost and our outermost. Something that when we find a way of honoring it and letting it have access to more honest eyes, deep honest eyes, so that that quality could be more precise innocence when that's in its place, our inmost and our outermost are literally one tissue. So on with the story. I think we do a little bit more. So now we've left the 3 sisters behind, and we have the 3 children, 2 brothers and 1 sister, right? Who got sent down the river and saved by the gardeners and brought up well. Probably better than they would have gotten brought up in the palace. So I don't think that's a coincidence. Sometimes we wish that we'd never been rejected. We'd never been thrown out. But it seems important to live on the edge, to be in exile, to have the experience of not being brought up in the palace. There are many stories in India where the heroes and heroines are sent into exile for 12 years. And it seems like somehow either they use it for their benefit, or it seems to be important to have the experience of being out. So we can either use that for our benefit, or feel how the flow of our lives, the times that we were left out, gave us qualities that we need. And especially the qualities of innocent honesty. If you imagine growing up in the palace where everyone is flattering you all the time and trying to get you at the same time, maybe even kill you because they want to be the next ruler. So being out of the politics, out of the mainstream, in whatever way. In the garden. And then somehow it gets to be the garden of your father's dream. The master gardener's dream garden. And then he's gone, so you get to take care of the master gardener's dream garden without worrying about politics. And one day, the 2 brothers go hunting, because you're supposed to go hunting, and they happen to love it. And there comes an old woman with her head covered, and it seems to the sister that the old woman is very tired and very devout, like, let's say, a practitioner who is very dedicated, experienced person. Not just ideas of fulfilling her life, but with experience, and looking tired. And so the sister calls her in and offers her something refreshing to drink in the shade of the most cool, shady tree, and then says, "Don't you want to see the garden?" Because everyone wants to see the garden. People come to see the garden. And the woman just only nods her head and doesn't say anything. Doesn't even say okay. And she follows the sister around the garden, not saying anything. And finally the sister says, "Don't you think this is the most amazing garden you've ever seen?" And the woman says, well, it is certainly one of the best gardens, but if you want me to be honest, it misses 3 things. So the sister, it misses 3 things. The sister first nearly falls over because she can't believe there could be anything missing from her father's garden, who was, after all, the head gardener of the king himself. But something gets her, and she really wants to know what this woman is talking about. Either she's crazy or she has something to say. What could possibly be missing from my father's garden? This is where the garden starts to be more her garden, like instead of her father's garden. It starts to come to be her garden. What is missing? And the woman says, the talking bird, the singing tree, and the golden water. The golden water. How can I get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the golden water? The woman says, go out your gate. It just so happens, if you go straight out the gate of this garden, the way it happens to be aligned and oriented, if you go straight, riding 20 days without stopping, you'll come across a dervish under the shade of a tree with a big bag next to him. Ask him. And the woman takes her leave. So the sister tries to hide her unease. This is where we thought we're doing great. We started to see some improvement. We have the best garden that anyone's ever heard of. People come to see it. And then someone with experience says, yeah, it's a really good garden. It's true. There are not many gardens like this, or maybe there's not even any garden like this, but you're missing 3 things. 3 things that you've never even heard of. So she's embarrassed. She doesn't want to say anything to her brothers when they come home in the evening. But of course they notice because they're very close. And they finally get it out of her. And she tells them everything. And that's the end of the story for today. So we have a few minutes in silence together. May all beings be happy, at ease, and fulfilled. May we live without shaming our honest innocence. Happy to hear news of what's missing. For the benefit of all. May our lives and our practice be dedicated to the welfare of all.